Recently, the New York Times launched a multi-part project titled The Inner Pandemic. It explores adolescent mental health through a series of articles. The most recent article, published August 27th, describes dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which studies show is the only treatment proven effective for teens struggling with suicidal behaviors. DBT was developed by renowned clinical psychologist Dr. Marsha Linehan after her own struggles with severe mental illness and suicidality in her youth. She writes this: "I was in hell, and I made a vow when I get out, I'm going to come back and get others out." The foundation of DBT is dialectics, whose origins are found in Greek philosophy. Dialectics is the examining of opposing ideas to reveal a truth, and in the instance of DBT, a truth that will lead to healing. In our gospel text today, I wonder if Jesus is also employing dialectics to reveal a truth that will lead all humankind to its healing. Large crowds are now following Jesus on his journey, including the one he speaks to today, for as Carolyn Sharp reminds us, what God is doing in Jesus is nothing short of spectacular. Jesus' miracles and teachings offering healing and reconciliation are drawing exciting crowds clamoring for this new way of life. Therefore, Jesus' teaching today is shocking and feels somewhat incongruous. Jesus begins with, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." And he closes with this conditional statement: "So therefore none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." Perhaps we are inclined to believe that Jesus is being hyperbolic. After all, he utilizes metaphor later in this parabolic teaching with the imagery of tower building planning and military campaign preparation to describe kingdom building in this new way of discipleship. However, even acknowledging this, Jesus' words are still confusing. Perhaps then it is helpful to consider if Jesus is speaking prescriptively or descriptively, a tool biblical scholars use in examining texts. A prescriptive reading of Jesus' words contradicts our gospel's themes as a whole, to love one's neighbor as oneself and even to love one's enemy. Surely then Jesus is not telling us to enact hate, deliberate harm towards our families, or to intentionally seek out suffering, or to abandon all worldly goods, including those necessary for daily living, in order to be his disciple. However, if we read Jesus' words descriptively, perhaps we recognize Jesus is describing the consequences, or simply the reality of discipleship. This certainly renders Christ's teaching less confusing, though perhaps no less disturbing. There is a cost to discipleship. And as the story will reveal, when confronted by the reality of that cost, crowds dissipate, turn on Jesus, deny him, adamantly refuse to gaze on the cross and accept it. We humans don't like to be confronted by suffering and our human sin, our moral failure which inflicts it. We'd prefer, like the large crowds, to gather joyfully in times of healing. It is perhaps easier to turn away from others' suffering or choose to sit self-righteously in our own. But I wonder if this is a form of cheap grace. There is a cost to making a different choice because it demands something is a cost to change. Working with her clients, Dr. Linehan noticed that those who suffer intensely resisted change. They resisted simply choosing life. She writes, I realized that what these people obviously needed was compassion, to validate them, to show that the factors driving their suffering made sense to me. I had to see the world from their point of view. What she discovered was radical acceptance of reality was critical to turning one's mind towards a possibility of new life. Acceptance and change is the primary dialectic of DBT. She writes, acceptance is the only path through hell. If you are in hell, the only way out is to go through a period of sustained misery. Misery is, of course, much better than hell, but it is painful nonetheless. By refusing to accept misery that it takes to climb out of hell, you end up falling back into hell repeatedly, only to have to start over and over again. In today's teaching, Jesus employs the dialectics of hate and love, suffering and flourishing, possessing and relinquishing, to create a tension we must grapple with in our discipleship walk. These dialectics reveal the truth of our human nature. We have the capacity to hate and love, to suffer and flourish, to control and to let go. We are both sinner and saint. Divine love entered our world in the personhood of Jesus Christ, not only to bear witness to our suffering from our point of view, but to experience it in human form. In his earthly journey, Christ validated our suffering and offered compassion. On the cross, Christ radically accepted and bore our suffering and sin and the possibility of new life. At the foot of the cross, humankind sees and is confronted by its sin, that which we have done and that which we have left undone. And we are offered the gift of new life. We who still resist life, that living in the eternal presence of divine, perfect love, have a choice by the gift of free will granted to us by God to radically accept the sin of our human condition and turn our minds toward the possibility of God's resurrecting love. The cross is the fundamental synthesis of acceptance and change. Yes, there is a cost to discipleship and the gift of a freely given yet costly transformative grace. Christ calls us to radically accept a world that will not embrace a crucified God and obediently follow. To radically accept the suffering of this world and offer forgiveness and grace. To radically accept our human desire for control and relinquish everything to experience God's transformative healing grace. To radically accept the gift of grace we have been freely given through the faith of Jesus Christ and willingly bear the cost of discipleship. Dr. Marsha Linehan spent years struggling with her own severe mental illness, beginning at the tender age of 17. After a childhood of striving successfully to meet her parents' demanding articulation of excellence and success and society's ideals of femininity, the Times writes that the gulf between the person she wanted to be and the person she was made her desperate, hopeless, and deeply homesick for a life she had never known. she began to drown. She attempted suicide multiple times, cut herself with any sharp object she could find, burned herself with cigarette butts, and was repeatedly hospitalized in various institutions for years. She endured over 20 electric shock treatments and intense psychiatric drugs to no avail. She was deemed incurable. No one thought she would survive. After years of suffering, she found herself praying in a small Chicago chapel. She writes, "One night I was kneeling in there looking up at the cross, and the whole place became gold. And suddenly I felt something coming toward me. It was this shimmering experience. And I just ran back to my room and said, I love myself." It was the first time I remember talking to myself in the first person. I felt transformed. This was the beginning of Dr. Linehan's healing journey, one in which she would bring countless others with her. God's work through Jesus Christ is spectacular indeed. It is a transformative grace that has the power to shift our thinking, change our hearts, and lead us to a profound, resurrecting healing in relationship with ourselves and others. There is a cost to discipleship in this way, and Christ's gift freely given of God's transformative love. Thanks be to God.